The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises. I sat in the back row, watching my wife of 12 years deliver what had to be her finest performance yet. Vanna Marrow stood before Judge Caraway in her signature power suit, navy blue Armani that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, gesturing dramatically as she painted me as the villain in our divorce proceedings. "Your Honor, my husband has been nothing more than a gold digger from day one," she declared, her voice carrying that practiced corporate authority she'd perfected during board meetings. "He married me when I was building my company from the ground up, contributed virtually nothing to our success, and now wants to walk away with half of everything I've worked to create." Her lawyer, Rafe Lindell, also known as her new boyfriend, nodded sagely from his position at the plaintiff's table. The man had the kind of artificially perfect smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials, all veneers and calculated charm. He'd been handling Vanna's legal affairs for 6 months now, though I suspected their professional relationship had expanded beyond billable hours sometime around month 2. "Mrs. Marrow has built Apex Technologies into a $40 million enterprise through her vision and leadership," Rafe added smoothly. "Meanwhile, Mr. Marrow has spent the majority of their marriage underemployed, working sporadic consulting gigs while living off his wife's success." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I sat perfectly still, letting them weave their narrative. Vanna's mother, Eleanor Whitman, dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief from the gallery behind me. The woman had perfected the art of theatrical suffering over her 73 years, and today's performance was particularly inspired. "He's taken advantage of my daughter's generous nature," Eleanor whispered loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Vanna supported that man while he played around with his little computer projects. Judge Caraway, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been presiding over family court for longer than I'd been married, listened to their presentation with the patient expression of someone who'd heard every sob story imaginable. When they finished, she turned her attention to me. "Mr. Marrow, you've been unusually quiet during these proceedings. Would you care to respond to these allegations?" I stood slowly, straightening my tie. Unlike Vanna's designer ensemble, I'd chosen a simple gray suit from Men's Warehouse. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed money. "Your Honor, I appreciate my wife's creative interpretation of our marriage, but before we proceed, I believe there might be some confusion about the financial dynamics of our relationship." Vanna's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together slightly. This wasn't part of her script. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "I'd like to submit a supplemental financial disclosure for the court's review." "Objection," Rafe interjected, though he sounded more confused than confident. "This is highly irregular. All financial disclosures should have been submitted during discovery." "Actually, Mr. Lindell, the court allows supplemental disclosures up until final hearing," Judge Caraway replied dryly. "I assume you're familiar with Family Court Rule 3.6? Rafe's perfect smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course, Your Honor. I simply—" "Mr. Marrow, please approach the bench." I walked forward, acutely aware of Vanna's eyes tracking my movement. She was trying to read my expression, probably wondering what I could possibly have to add to the financial picture. After all, she'd been managing our household finances for years. She knew exactly how much money I made. Or so she thought. I handed the folder to Judge Caraway, who opened it and began scanning the documents inside. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes as she processed the numbers. "Mr. Marrow, according to these tax returns and bank statements, your annual income for the past 3 years has averaged $550,000. Is that correct?" The courtroom went silent. Not the comfortable quiet of people listening intently, but the shocked silence that follows an unexpected revelation. I could practically feel Vanna's confusion radiating from across the room. "That's correct, Your Honor. I've been running an AI consulting firm specializing in predictive analytics for Fortune 500 companies." The work is project-based and highly specialized, which is why the income might not have been immediately apparent to my wife." "What?" Vanna's voice cracked slightly, her composure slipping for the first time all morning. "How much?" Judge Carraway looked up from the documents with what might have been amusement. "Mrs. Marrow, with your husband reporting an annual income of $550,000, I'm curious how you define gold digging in this context." Eleanor's theatrical dabbing stopped abruptly. The handkerchief remained frozen halfway to her face as she stared at me with something approaching horror. Rafe's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible," Vanna stammered. "He works from home. He barely leaves his office. I would have known." "Would you have?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time you asked about my work? When did you last show any interest in what I do during those long hours in my home office?" The truth was, Vanna had been so focused on her own empire building that she'd completely dismissed my professional life. In her mind, I was the underachieving husband who'd married above his station. She'd never bothered to investigate further. "Your Honor," Rafe said, recovering slightly, "even if these figures are accurate, it doesn't change the fundamental issue. Mrs. Marrow built her company with some interesting financial arrangements, it appears," I interrupted, pulling out a second folder. "Your Honor, I'd also like to submit evidence regarding the source of some of Mrs. Marrow's reported income." This time, Vanna actually stood up. "What are you doing, Brent?" "What I should have done years ago, paying attention." Judge Carraway accepted the second folder, and I watched her expression grow more serious as she reviewed the contents. Bank statements, wire transfer records, email correspondence, months of careful documentation that painted a very different picture of Vanna's business practices. "Mrs. Marrow, according to these documents, you've been routing executive bonuses through accounts held by Eleanor Whitman, your mother, before transferring them back to your personal accounts. Can you explain this arrangement?" Eleanor's face had gone pale. The handkerchief fluttered to the floor as her hands began to shake. That's a perfectly legal tax strategy," Vanna said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Perhaps," Judge Carraway replied, "but it raises questions about the accuracy of your financial disclosures to this court. Mr. Marrow, how did you obtain these records?" "Through perfectly legal channels, Your Honor. Bank records for joint accounts, email correspondence from shared devices, and publicly available corporate filings. Everything in that folder was accessible to me as Mrs. Marrow's spouse and business partner. Because that was the thing Vanna had forgotten in her rush to paint me as a deadbeat husband. Technically, I was still listed as a partner in Apex Technologies, a minor partner with limited voting rights, but a partner nonetheless. It was a detail from our early marriage, when she'd needed someone to co-sign incorporation documents. She'd probably assumed I'd forgotten about it. I hadn't forgotten anything. "Your Honor," I continued, "I'd like to request a court-ordered forensic audit of Apex Technologies' financial records, particularly regarding executive compensation and the backdating of equity grants." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Vanna's face went through several color changes before settling on a pale shade that matched her mother's. "Backdating?" Judge Carraway asked. "Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence suggesting that stock options were issued with retroactive effective dates to maximize their value, which would constitute securities fraud if reported incorrectly to regulatory agencies." Rafe was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Mr. Marrow is clearly attempting to deflect from his own—" "Mr. Lindell," Judge Carraway said sharply, "I suggest you review the evidence before making objections. Mr. Marrow, these are serious allegations." "Yes, Your Honor, which is why I believe a forensic audit is necessary to ensure all marital assets are properly valued and disclosed." I could see Vanna's mind racing, trying to calculate the implications. A forensic audit would expose everything: the hidden bonuses, the questionable stock options, the creative accounting that had helped her build her $40 million empire. More importantly, It would reveal that her claims about being the sole breadwinner were not just wrong, but potentially fraudulent. "Motion granted," Judge Carraway said. "I'm ordering a complete forensic audit of Apex Technologies to be conducted by a court-appointed accountant. Furthermore, I'm freezing all executive stock options and bonuses pending the completion of this audit." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent courtroom. Vanna sank into her chair, staring at me with something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Not anger, not confusion, but genuine fear. For the first time in our 12-year marriage, my wife was looking at me as an equal. It was about time. The silence in our designer kitchen felt different now. Not the comfortable quiet of a shared morning routine, but the tense stillness that comes before a storm. Vanna sat at the marble island, still wearing her courtroom power suit, staring at her phone screen without really seeing it. $550,000, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. How is that even possible? I poured myself a cup of coffee from the machine she'd insisted we needed, some Italian monstrosity that cost more than most people's cars. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only one in this house who could actually afford it. "Predictive analytics is a specialized field," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "Companies pay premium rates for accurate market forecasting. My algorithms have saved my clients millions in bad investments." "But you work from home. You never travel, never have meetings." "Everything's remote now, Vanna. Welcome to the 21st century." She looked up at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to address directly. Why didn't I tell her? Because she'd never asked. Because she'd been so convinced of her own superiority that she'd never considered I might be successful in my own right. Because somewhere along the way, our marriage had become a performance where she played the star and I played the supporting character. Would it have mattered? I asked instead. Her silence was answer enough. My phone buzzed with a text message. Monica Hartwell, Vanna's best friend and fellow board member at Apex Technologies. "What the hell happened in court today? Vanna won't answer her phone." I showed Vanna the screen. "Your support network is getting restless." She snatched the phone from my hand, reading the message with growing agitation. "Monica doesn't know anything. Neither does anyone else. This stays between us until..." "Until what? Until you figure out how to spin it?" I took the phone back. "Vanna, the forensic audit is happening. The court records are public. By tomorrow, everyone in your social circle will know exactly what's going on." The color drained from her face. Vanna's entire identity was built on being the successful CEO, the power player, the woman who had everything under control. The idea that her carefully constructed image might crumble was clearly more terrifying than any financial consequences. "We can work this out," she said, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used in business negotiations. "The audit will take months. We can settle before then, divide everything fairly." "Fairly?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Like how you were planning to divide things fairly when you thought I was broke." She had the grace to look embarrassed at least. My phone rang. Rafe Lindell's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with theatrical politeness. "Rafe, how nice to hear from you so soon after our courtroom encounter." "Cut the act, Brent." His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk." "I'm not sure that's appropriate, given that you're representing my wife. Conflict of interest and all that." "I'm calling as a concerned friend." "Friend?" I interrupted. "Is that what we're calling it? I suppose boyfriend would be too honest for a lawyer." The silence on the other end told me I'd hit the mark. Vanna was watching me intently, trying to read my expression. "Meet me at Sullivan's bar in an hour," Rafe said finally. "One drink. Off the record." "Off the record conversations with opposing counsel?" "Rafe, I'm disappointed. I thought you'd have better professional ethics. 1 hour, Brent. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The line went quiet. I set the phone down and smiled at Vanna. Your boyfriend wants to have a chat. He's not my... She stopped herself, realizing the denial was pointless. What are you going to do? Have a drink with Rafe. Maybe get to know the man who's been keeping my wife company while I work those long hours in my home office. I stood up, straightening my tie. Vanna grabbed my arm as I passed her chair. Brent, please, don't do anything stupid. I looked down at her manicured fingers gripping my sleeve. 6 months ago, that touch might have meant something. Now it just felt like another attempt at manipulation. Stupid would have been letting you walk away with everything while painting me as a gold digger, I said gently. Smart is making sure everyone knows the truth. Sullivan's bar was exactly the kind of place Vanna would never be caught in. Dim lighting, worn leather booths, and a clientele that valued anonymity over appearances. It was also the kind of place where conversations were easily overheard, which made it perfect for my purposes. Rafe was already there when I arrived, nursing a whiskey and looking considerably less polished than he had in court. His perfect hair was slightly mussed, his tie loosened. The pressure was getting to him. You look tired, Rafe, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. Rough day at the office? What do you want, Brent? Nothing. You're the one who called this meeting. He took a long sip of his whiskey, studying me over the rim of his glass. The forensic audit. You know it's going to hurt Vanna more than it helps you. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, the truth seems to be working out pretty well for me. The backdating allegations, you can't prove intent. At worst, it's a paperwork error, but the publicity will destroy her company. I signaled the bartender for a beer. Maybe she should have thought about that before calling me a gold digger in open court. She was emotional. Divorce makes people say things they don't mean. Does it also make them sleep with their lawyers? Rafe's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. Actually, it is. Adultery affects asset division in Massachusetts. Did you advise your client about that before you started your relationship? We didn't. He stopped himself, realizing he was about to admit to either professional misconduct or perjury. Didn't what, Rafe? Didn't think I'd find out? Didn't care about the ethical implications, or didn't think the underachieving husband would be smart enough to connect the dots? The bartender brought my beer, and I took a slow sip while Rafe struggled to regain his composure. Around us, the usual evening crowd was filtering in: construction workers, office staff, local regulars who'd been coming here for decades. The kind of people who knew how to listen without seeming to. What do you want? Rafe asked again. I want my wife to admit that she was wrong. About the gold digging. About my contributions to our marriage. About thinking she could steamroll me in divorce court. And if she does? Then maybe we can discuss terms. But not until the audit is complete. And not until she acknowledges, publicly, that her characterization of our relationship was inaccurate. Rafe leaned forward. Public acknowledgement could damage her professionally. So could securities fraud charges. The threat hung between us like a blade. Rafe's face went pale as he processed the implications. You wouldn't. I wouldn't what? Report potential criminal activity to the appropriate authorities? Rafe, I'm hurt. What kind of citizen do you think I am? He finished his whiskey in one gulp. You're making a mistake, Brent. Vanna has resources you don't understand, friends in high places. She won't go down without a fight. Good, I said, raising my beer in a mock toast. I was hoping this wouldn't be too easy. As Rafe left the bar, I noticed several of the regulars watching him go. Word would spread. By tomorrow, everyone in our social circle would know that Vanna's lawyer had been desperate enough to meet her husband in a dive bar. The speculation alone would be delicious. I finished my beer slowly, savoring both the taste and the anticipation. Vanna had spent years underestimating me, treating me like an accessory to her success story. Now she was about to learn what happened when the supporting character decided to write his own script. My phone buzzed with another text from Monica. "Rafe says you're being unreasonable. Call me." I smiled and typed back. "Tell Rafe that reasonable went out the window when your best friend called me a gold digger in open court. But thanks for checking in." The response came immediately. "This isn't over." I typed one final message. "I certainly hope not. It's just getting interesting." The forensic accountant arrived at Apex Technologies on a Tuesday morning, armed with boxes of documents and the kind of determined expression that suggested she'd seen every creative bookkeeping trick in existence. Margaret Chen was a small woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the reputation for finding financial irregularities that other auditors missed. I knew this because I'd specifically requested her for the job. Vanna had spent the weekend in damage control mode, calling board members and key investors to provide context for the upcoming audit. But there's only so much context you can provide when the court has ordered a complete examination of your company's books. "She's panicking," Monica told me over coffee at the cafe near my office. Vanna's best friend had requested this meeting, claiming she wanted to mediate between us. What she really wanted was information. "Is she?" I asked, stirring cream into my coffee with deliberate slowness. "That seems unlike Vanna. She's usually so composed under pressure." Monica's perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the stress lines around her eyes. As Apex's chief marketing officer and Vanna's closest confidant, she had as much to lose as anyone if the audit uncovered serious problems. "Look, Brent, we've known each other for 8 years. I've always liked you, even when Vanna—" She trailed off, probably realizing that finishing that sentence wouldn't help her cause. "Even when Vanna what? Complained about her underachieving husband, made jokes about supporting me, treated me like an embarrassing relative at company parties?" Monica had the grace to look uncomfortable. She never meant it that way, didn't she? Because from where I was sitting, it felt pretty intentional. A text message interrupted our conversation. Margaret Chen, updating me on the audit's progress. Found the first discrepancy. Stock options dated 6 months before board approval. This is just day 1. I showed Monica the screen. "Looks like your friend has some explaining to do." "You can't seriously be enjoying this," Monica said, her voice rising slightly. "If Apex goes under, hundreds of people lose their jobs, including me. Maybe you should have thought about that before you helped Vanna hide income through shell companies." Monica's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down too quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Eleanor Whitman Holdings, registered in Delaware with you listed as the corporate secretary. Ring any bells?" The color drained from Monica's face. She'd clearly thought that particular detail was buried deep enough to avoid scrutiny. Unfortunately for her, I'd spent months preparing for this moment. "That's a legitimate business entity?" she said weakly. "I'm sure it is. I'm also sure Margaret Chen will find it very interesting when she starts tracing the money flow between Eleanor's accounts and Vanna's bonuses." Monica stood abruptly. "I need to go." "Give Vanna my regards," I called as she hurried toward the exit. "Tell her I'm looking forward to seeing the audit results." That afternoon, I received a call from Judge Carraway's clerk. Vanna's legal team had filed an emergency motion to halt the audit, claiming that I was somehow interfering with the process. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I called my own lawyer, David Martinez, a quiet man in his 60s who specialized in complex divorce cases. Unlike Rafe's flashy courtroom style, David preferred thorough preparation and methodical presentation of facts. "They're desperate," David said after reviewing Vanna's motion. "Claiming you're coaching the auditor, interfering with business operations, causing irreparable harm to the company, it's all smoke and mirrors." "Can they stop the audit?" "Not likely. Judge Carraway ordered it, and nothing in their motion suggests any actual misconduct on your part. But it tells us they're finding things they don't want exposed." That evening, I found Vanna in her home office, surrounded by documents and looking more frazzled than I'd seen her in years. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she'd traded her designer suits for jeans and a wrinkled blouse. "Working late?" I asked from the doorway. She looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes: genuine vulnerability. "The board wants answers," she said quietly. "About the audit, about the stock options, about why I didn't know my husband was making $500,000 a year. That last one must be particularly embarrassing." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I deserved that. The admission surprised me. Vanna never admitted to being wrong about anything. "Did you really backdate the stock options?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers scattered across her desk. "The board approved them retroactively. It's not uncommon in startup environments." "That's not what I asked." Another silence. Then, "Yes. But everyone benefited. The company, the employees, the investors. Everyone except the SEC, which requires accurate reporting of executive compensation. It's a gray area." "No, Vanna, it's not. And you know it." She buried her face in her hands. "What do you want from me, Brent? What will it take to make this stop?" I sat down across from her desk, the same desk where she'd spent countless hours building her empire while I worked in the basement office she'd relegated me to. "I want you to admit that you were wrong. About me, about our marriage, about thinking you could humiliate me in court without consequences. And then we'll see." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or you'll regret it." I showed Vanna the screen. "Any idea who might have sent this?" She read the message, and I watched her face cycle through several emotions: surprise, concern, and something that might have been fear. "I don't know," she said finally. "Really?" "Because the number traces back to a prepaid phone purchased at a store near Monica's apartment." Vanna's eyes widened. "Monica wouldn't what? Threaten me to protect herself?" "Vanna, your best friend is looking at potential criminal charges if the audit uncovers what I think it will. People do desperate things when they're cornered." I stood up, pocketing my phone. "You might want to be careful about who you trust. I have a feeling this is about to get much more complicated." As I left her office, I heard her phone ringing. Monica's name appeared on the caller ID, and I paused to listen to Vanna's side of the conversation. "No, I didn't know about the text. What do you mean, handle it?" "Monica, don't do anything stupid." But I was already walking away, smiling to myself. The cracks in Vanna's carefully constructed world were starting to show, and her allies were beginning to panic. The audit was just the beginning. By Thursday morning, everything would change again. Judge Carraway's courtroom felt different on Thursday morning. The gallery was fuller. Word had spread through our social circle about the audit, and several familiar faces had come to watch the drama unfold. I spotted 3 Apex board members, 2 of Vanna's country club friends, and even our neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who'd probably never missed a day of local gossip in her 75 years. Vanna entered with a new legal team. Rafe was notably absent. "Where's your boyfriend?" I whispered to David as we took our seats. "Recused himself," David replied quietly. "Conflict of interest? Smart move, actually. This case is about to get very messy." Vanna's new lead counsel was Patricia Voss, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with the kind of aggressive reputation that came with a $1,000 hourly rate. She'd clearly been brought in to clean up whatever mess Rafe had made of the case. "Your Honor," Patricia began, "my client respectfully requests an immediate halt to the forensic audit of Apex Technologies. The audit is causing irreparable harm to the company's operations and reputation, based on unsubstantiated allegations from a disgruntled spouse." Judge Carraway looked unimpressed. "Ms. Voss, I ordered this audit based on documented evidence submitted by Mr. Marrow. Are you claiming that evidence was fabricated?" Not fabricated, Your Honor, but taken out of context and misinterpreted by someone without the expertise to understand complex corporate finance structures. I almost laughed. The someone without expertise had just provided evidence that was apparently compelling enough to warrant a forensic audit. David stood up. Your Honor, if I may address the court? Proceed, Mr. Martinez. Ms. Voss's motion fails to address the central issue, which is the accuracy of financial disclosures made to this court. The audit has been in progress for exactly 3 days, and already the forensic accountant has identified multiple instances of backdated stock options and unreported executive compensation. These aren't interpretation issues. They're documentation discrepancies that require explanation. What documentation discrepancies? Judge Carraway asked. David approached the bench with a folder. Your Honor, I have a preliminary report from Ms. Chen, the court-appointed auditor. She's identified 17 instances where stock options were granted with effective dates predating board approval, and at least 12 cases where executive bonuses were routed through third-party accounts before being transferred to personal accounts belonging to Mrs. Marrow. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. I could see Vanna's face growing pale as David laid out the initial findings. Furthermore, David continued, Ms. Chen has discovered that Mrs. Marrow's reported income to this court was understated by approximately 30% due to these alternative compensation arrangements. Patricia was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, these are preliminary findings from an incomplete audit. Drawing conclusions at this stage is premature and prejudicial to my client. Ms. Voss, your client called Mr. Marrow a gold digger, based on the assumption that she was the primary breadwinner in the marriage. If her own income was understated by 30%, and his income was understated by approximately 400%, I'd say these findings are highly relevant to the court's determination of asset division. Judge Carraway's tone suggested she was losing patience with Vanna's legal maneuvering. Your Honor, I said, standing up, if I may. Mr. Marrow, you're represented by counsel. I understand, Your Honor, but I think there's something the court should know about the timing of this motion. David shot me a warning look, but I continued anyway. Yesterday evening, I received a threatening text message from a phone number registered to Monica Hartwell, who serves as Chief Marketing Officer of Apex Technologies and is listed as corporate secretary for several of the shell companies used in these compensation schemes. Patricia objected immediately. Hearsay, Your Honor, and irrelevant to the motion before the court. Actually, Ms. Voss, it's quite relevant, Judge Carraway replied. Mr. Marrow, do you have evidence of this alleged threat? I handed my phone to the bailiff, who showed the screen to Judge Carraway. The text was still there. Back off, or you'll regret it. Your Honor, I continued, I believe this emergency motion is part of a coordinated attempt to halt the audit before it uncovers the full extent of the financial irregularities at Apex Technologies. The threat was sent less than 24 hours after I met with Ms. Hartwell, during which I mentioned specific details about the shell company arrangements. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the whispered conversations had stopped as everyone strained to hear what would happen next. Judge Carraway studied my phone screen for a long moment. Ms. Voss, does your client have any knowledge of threats made against Mr. Marrow? Your Honor, my client has no control over the independent actions of her employees. That wasn't my question. Does Mrs. Marrow have any knowledge of threats made against her husband? All eyes turned to Vanna, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she stood up. Your Honor, I was aware that Ms. Hartwell was upset about the audit, but I had no knowledge of any threats. Did you discuss Mr. Marrow's allegations with Ms. Hartwell? Another pause. Yes, Your Honor. And did you discuss strategies for stopping the audit? Patricia grabbed Vanna's arm, probably trying to prevent her from answering, but Vanna gently pulled away. Yes, Your Honor, but I never authorized threats or intimidation. Judge Carraway leaned back in her chair, considering the situation. The courtroom remained silent, waiting for her decision. Motion denied, she said finally. The audit will continue. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting any employee or agent of Apex Technologies from contacting Mr. Marrow directly. All communication must go through counsel. She turned to look directly at Vanna. Mrs. Marrow, I'm disappointed that we're having this conversation. Attempting to interfere with a court-ordered audit through intimidation is a serious matter. If there are any further incidents, I'll hold you in contempt of court. Patricia tried one more time. Your Honor, if we could just postpone the audit until… Ms. Voss, the audit continues. Ms. Chen will have full access to all corporate records, and I expect complete cooperation from Apex Technologies. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to review her complete findings. The gavel came down with finality. As the courtroom emptied, I caught sight of Monica Hartwell near the back exit. She was trying to leave unnoticed, but our eyes met for a moment. The fear in her expression told me everything I needed to know about what the audit was likely to uncover. Vanna approached me as I gathered my papers. Brent, can we talk? Through counsel only, I replied, echoing Judge Carraway's order. Those are the rules now. I never wanted it to get this ugly. Then you shouldn't have called me a gold digger in open court. She looked like she wanted to say more, but Patricia appeared at her elbow, guiding her toward the exit. As they left, I heard Patricia's voice. We need to discuss damage control strategies. David clapped me on the shoulder. Nice work with the threat evidence. That really undermined their credibility. It's about to get worse for them, I said, watching Vanna disappear through the courthouse doors. Margaret Chen is just getting started. My phone buzzed with a text from the auditor. Found the smoking gun. Call me tonight. I showed David the message. His eyebrows rose slightly. What do you think she found? Everything, I said. I think she found everything. Margaret Chen's office looked like a financial crime scene. Documents covered every surface. Bank statements, corporate filings, email printouts, and spreadsheets that tracked money through a maze of accounts and shell companies. The forensic accountant sat behind her desk, surrounded by evidence of what appeared to be years of systematic financial manipulation. It's worse than I initially thought, Margaret said, gesturing to the organized chaos around her. What started as backdated stock options has led me to a sophisticated scheme involving multiple shell companies, unreported income, and what appears to be tax evasion on a significant scale. I sat across from her, trying to process the implications. How significant? Over the past 5 years, approximately $2.3 million in executive compensation was routed through various entities to avoid proper reporting. Eleanor Whitman Holdings was just the tip of the iceberg. She handed me a flow chart that looked like a spider web of financial connections. Names I recognized, Monica Hartwell, Eleanor Whitman, even Rafe Lindell, appeared as officers or beneficiaries of various corporate entities. Your wife is very smart, Margaret continued. Or someone advising her is. This isn't amateur hour. The shell companies were properly incorporated, the transfers were documented, and everything was designed to look legitimate on the surface. But it's not legitimate. Not when the purpose is to hide income from regulatory agencies and tax authorities, and definitely not when those hidden assets aren't disclosed during divorce proceedings. Margaret pulled out another document, a bank statement from an account I'd never seen before. This is the most interesting discovery, an account held jointly by Vanna Marrow and Monica Hartwell, funded by transfers from Apex Technologies and used for what the records describe as consulting fees and marketing expenses. How much? $400,000 over 2 years. The money was transferred to this joint account, then moved to personal accounts belonging to both women. Monica received about 60%, Vanna got the rest. I studied the bank statement, recognizing the dates. These transfers correspond to major client acquisitions at Apex. They were paying themselves bonuses for successful deals. Exactly. But none of this income was reported to the IRS or disclosed to your divorce attorney. As far as the court knows, this money doesn't exist. My phone rang. David Martinez, probably calling for an update on the audit findings. David, you're going to want to sit down for this. That bad? That good. For us. Margaret has uncovered evidence of systematic income hiding, tax evasion, and what appears to be embezzlement from Apex Technologies. Jesus. How much money are we talking about? Over $2 million in hidden compensation, plus another $400,000 in unreported joint account transfers. The silence on the other end told me David was calculating the implications. Brent, this changes everything. We're not just talking about asset division anymore. This is potential criminal activity. I know. What do you want to do? I looked at Margaret, who was watching me with the expression of someone who'd seen this moral dilemma many times before. Report the crimes, and potentially send my wife to prison, or use the information as leverage in the divorce. Let's schedule a meeting with Vanna's attorney, I said finally. I think it's time for a settlement conference. 2 days later, we gathered in a conference room at Patricia Voss's law firm. The atmosphere was tense. Patricia and Vanna on one side of the polished mahogany table, David and me on the other. Margaret Chen sat at the head of the table with her audit report, looking like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Before we begin, Patricia said, I want to state for the record that my client disputes any allegations of financial impropriety. Ms. Voss, David interrupted, perhaps you should review the audit findings before making any statements for the record. Margaret opened her report and began reading in a calm, professional voice that made the devastating findings sound like a weather report. Apex Technologies, under the leadership of CEO Brent Marrow, engaged in systematic underreporting of executive compensation through a network of shell companies and third-party accounts. Total unreported income over the past 5 years, $2.3 million. Vanna's face had gone completely white. Patricia was frantically taking notes, probably trying to calculate how many laws her client had broken. Furthermore, Margaret continued, Mrs. Marrow and Chief Marketing Officer Monica Hartwell established a joint account that received transfers totaling $400,000 from corporate accounts, disguised as consulting fees and marketing expenses. These are serious allegations, Patricia said weakly. They're not allegations, Margaret replied. They're documented facts, supported by bank records, corporate filings, and email correspondence. David leaned forward. Ms. Voss, I think you need to understand the scope of potential criminal exposure here. Tax evasion, securities fraud, embezzlement. We're looking at multiple felony charges if this information reaches the appropriate authorities. What do you want? Patricia asked. I spoke for the first time since the meeting began. I want what I've always wanted. An acknowledgement that Vanna was wrong about our marriage, wrong about my contributions, and wrong to call me a gold digger in open court. And in exchange, this information stays in the divorce file and doesn't find its way to the IRS or the SEC. Vanna finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You'd really do that? Send me to prison? You called me a gold digger, Vanna, in open court, in front of our friends and neighbors. You tried to take everything I'd worked for while hiding millions of dollars in income. I was angry. You were wrong. About everything, and now you're going to admit it. Patricia was reading through Margaret's report, her expression growing more grim with each page. These findings, if they're accurate, Margaret said firmly. I stake my professional reputation on it. What kind of acknowledgement are you looking for? Patricia asked. David slid a document across the table. A public statement, to be filed with the court and released to local media. Mrs. Marrow admits that her characterization of Mr. Marrow as a gold digger was inaccurate and unfair. She acknowledges his financial contributions to the marriage and apologizes for any damage to his reputation. Patricia read the statement, then showed it to Vanna. I watched my wife's face as she processed what we were asking, A complete public humiliation, the destruction of the narrative she'd built about our marriage. "And if I refuse?" Vanna asked. "Then Margaret's report gets forwarded to the appropriate federal agencies," I said. "And you can explain to a criminal jury why you thought hiding $2.7 million in income was a good idea." The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Patricia's pen scratching across her legal pad. After what felt like an eternity, Vanna looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was wrong about you, about everything." "Save it for the public statement," I replied. Patricia cleared her throat. "We'll need time to review the proposed settlement terms. You have until tomorrow morning," David said. "After that, we file the audit report with the court and let Judge Carraway decide what to do with evidence of perjury and financial fraud." As we left the conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. Vanna had spent our entire marriage treating me like a supporting character in her success story. Now she was about to learn what happened when the supporting character became the star. My phone buzzed with a text from Monica. "We need to talk, please." I showed the message to David. "Think I should meet with her?" "Absolutely not. Let her attorney contact us if she wants to discuss her own legal exposure." But as we walked to the parking garage, I was already planning my next move. Monica had sent me threatening messages and helped orchestrate the financial schemes that Margaret had uncovered. She deserved to face the consequences of her choices, just like Vanna was about to face the consequences of hers. The game was almost over, and I was winning. The final hearing took place on a gray October morning that matched the somber mood in Judge Carraway's courtroom. Word had spread through our social circle about the audit findings, and the gallery was packed with familiar faces, some supportive, others clearly there for the spectacle. Vanna sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the confident CEO who'd called me a gold digger 6 weeks ago. In her place sat a woman who'd been stripped of her illusions and forced to confront the consequences of her actions. Patricia Voss had clearly advised her client to accept our settlement terms. The alternative, criminal prosecution for tax evasion and securities fraud, was too risky to ignore. "Your Honor," Patricia began, "my client would like to make a statement to the court." Judge Carraway nodded. "Proceed, Mrs. Marrow." Vanna stood slowly, holding a piece of paper that trembled slightly in her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to the court and to my husband for statements I made during these proceedings. When I characterized Brent Marrow as a gold digger, I was speaking from anger and ignorance rather than facts." She paused, glancing at me briefly before continuing. "The truth is that my husband contributed significantly more to our marriage, both financially and personally, than I acknowledged. His annual income exceeded my own, and his business success was achieved through his own talent and hard work, not through any dependence on me." The courtroom was completely silent. I could see Eleanor Whitman in the gallery, dabbing her eyes with the same monogrammed handkerchief she'd used during our first hearing. But this time, the tears looked real. "I also want to acknowledge that I made serious errors in judgment regarding my own financial disclosures to this court. The forensic audit revealed compensation arrangements that should have been reported but weren't. I take full responsibility for these oversights." Oversights. Even in her moment of public humiliation, Vanna couldn't bring herself to admit to deliberate fraud. "Finally, I want to apologize to my husband for the damage my false statements may have caused to his reputation. Brent Marrow is not a gold digger. He never was. I was wrong to suggest otherwise." She sat down, looking exhausted. Judge Carraway studied the settlement agreement for several minutes before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Marrow, divorce brings out the worst in people sometimes, but what I've seen in this case goes beyond typical marital discord. Mrs. Marrow, your initial financial disclosures to this court were not just incomplete. They were deliberately misleading. Vanna flinched as if she'd been struck. The forensic audit revealed a pattern of hidden assets and unreported income that, frankly, borders on criminal behavior. The only reason we're discussing a settlement rather than criminal charges is because Mr. Marrow has chosen to show remarkable restraint. Judge Caraway turned her attention to me. Mr. Marrow, I commend you for your patience throughout these proceedings. Lesser men might have responded to your wife's accusations with anger rather than evidence. Thank you, Your Honor. The court accepts the settlement agreement as submitted. Mrs. Marrow will retain 50% of Apex Technologies, minus the value of hidden assets identified in the audit. Mr. Marrow will receive the family home, his business assets, and 50% of all marital property, including the previously undisclosed accounts. The gavel came down with finality. After 12 years of marriage and 6 weeks of legal warfare, it was over. As the courtroom emptied, Monica Hartwell approached me near the exit. She looked as defeated as Vanna, probably because she knew her own legal troubles were just beginning. I hope you're satisfied, she said bitterly. Actually, I am. For the first time in years, I'm completely satisfied. You destroyed her. Was your ego really worth that? I looked at Monica, really looked at her, and saw not a friend concerned about Vanna's welfare, but a co-conspirator angry about getting caught. Monica, you helped my wife steal almost $3 million and hide it from the IRS. You sent me threatening text messages when I got too close to the truth, and now you want to lecture me about ego. She opened her mouth to respond, then apparently thought better of it and walked away. I watched her go, knowing that Margaret Chen's report would eventually make its way to federal investigators. Monica's problems were just beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Word had leaked about the audit findings, and the local business press wanted comments about the Apex Technologies scandal. Mr. Marrow, how do you respond to your wife's allegations that you were a gold digger? A young reporter asked, shoving a microphone in my face. I think my wife answered that question pretty thoroughly in court today, I replied. Sometimes the truth takes a while to come out, but it always does eventually. What's next for you? I'm going to focus on my business and move forward with my life. The past is the past. But as I walked to my car, I couldn't help but smile. The past wasn't really past, it was vindication. Vanna had spent years treating me like a supporting character in her success story, never bothering to learn about my work or respect my contributions to our marriage. Now everyone knew the truth. The gold digger in our relationship hadn't been me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Congratulations, you played this perfectly. I deleted the message without responding. Whoever had sent it was right. I had played it perfectly. But the game was over now, and I'd won more completely than I'd ever imagined possible. 6 weeks ago, Vanna had stood in Judge Caraway's courtroom and called me a gold digger, while her lawyer boyfriend nodded in agreement. Today, she'd been forced to publicly admit that she was wrong about everything. The supporting character had become the star of his own story, and unlike Vanna's carefully constructed narrative, this one was built on truth. I drove home to the house that was now entirely mine, thinking about what came next. The answer was simple: whatever I wanted. For the first time in 12 years, I was completely free to write my own script.